Hello, my name is Alex Isles, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about the Ingleby Barwick Villa, which is in the middle of a housing estate. Welcome back. So, the Ingleby Barwick Villa is in the Tees Valley, and Ingleby Barwick, when it was built, was the largest housing estate of its time in Europe. So, when you've got a huge housing estate being built, thankfully, due to British law, you have to have archaeologists present. And that means that you can preserve British history. What happens is, as they are starting, the archaeologists do assessments of the land. When they do assessments of the land, they figure out where could there actually be important sites that would basically change our understanding of the local area, change our understanding of history, and then basically you have to start assessing the land. When you do assessments, then you go on to the next stage, which is probably ground penetrating radar and stuff like that, and you plan out what you're going to actually excavate. And as you plan out what you're going to excavate, then you basically put that forwards to the local area when they're doing all the planning. So it's a combination of the building companies with the archaeologists and also the local council, and then you basically decide what areas are going to be targeted. Now, understandably, archaeology can be quite expensive, and because housing companies have to foot quite a bit of the bill, they're not always keen about excavating larger structures, especially things that are going to take more time, more effort, and also need much more diligence. So because of that, at Ingleby Barwick, what you actually had was that they knew from the 1970s that there was a villa in this area where they were going to build the housing estate. So when they did it, they looked at the surrounding area and they figured out where the villa was, and it's a winged villa. As I've talked about in previous villa episodes, what you have is you get the normal building built, which is normally a corridor villa. So it's a corridor with the rooms coming off the sides, and then add two wings on, and when they add those two wings on, you basically get something that's an aggrandized building. So when you get reconstructions of them, they look quite impressive because you get the central building, the two protruding sections, and as you walk towards them, it looks a really impressive building. And they are mostly two-structure buildings from what we can tell. So what then happened here at Ingleby Barwick was they figured out where the villa was, and they basically decided we're going to preserve this. So it's still there underneath the grass. It's not been excavated. But then they excavated the whole surrounding area around the villa, so that they could understand what the villa estate was like. So they started off, they did the pre-valuation of the site, they figured out where things were, they evaluated everything, and then when they were evaluating it, they then decided, okay, the main villa will be left in situ. The full excavation of the rest of the villa complex occurred in 2003 to 2004. And when they did that, they discovered an Iron Age settlement on the site. So again, as we've talked about before, if the land's good, there's probably people living there. So there was an Iron Age British settlement. It's then abandoned for some reason in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. I wonder why that is. It's not as if the Roman army's coming through and there's a huge military presence in the local area, and it might not be a good idea to live in the area, or the Romans are setting up nearby, so you leave. When it's abandoned in the late 2nd century, so this is after Hadrian's Wall's been constructed, after this area has been brought into the Roman province, the villa is constructed. And alongside the villa, an aisled hall is constructed as well. So the villa, obviously, as I said, is a winged villa. So you have the two wings on the side, and you have the central villa. And then you have an aisled hall. And I've mentioned in previous videos, an aisled hall is where you basically have a structure that's like a large hall, and it has two sets of aisles for the center that then support a second story, sometimes even a third story if you look at the really large ones. And they're normally interpreted as barns, but they often have secondary purposes in the 3rd and 4th centuries, where you see bathhouses, corn dryers, and possibly like high status rooms with mosaics and stuff like that being added to them. So you have an aisled hall at the site. Now, the site continues right the way through into the 4th century. So from the late 2nd century right the way to the 4th century, you have continuous use, and you have additional buildings around, but they were very badly damaged by later ploughing. And so we know that there were additional buildings in this villa complex, but we don't know too much about them. We also know that the villa had an attached calderum, which is a small bathhouse, which was used in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, but it's very small. It was about 2 by 4 meters, so it's only enough for a very small number of people. There are suggestions that villa owners would build bathhouses that would be basically for their tenants. So you'd have the main villa that would have its own private bathhouse for the villa owner and his high status guests, and then on the other side you'd have the sort of the tenants one. So you come to do business with the villa owner, you sit down with him, you say, all right, my rent is this year. Do you know what? We've managed to, extend the herds that we are managing for you. We've got more cattle, more sheep than last year. Grain production's up. Things are going really well. Here's our tax. This is what's going on. And then he goes, you know what? You've done a really good job for me. Before you go, please feel free to use the bathhouse. Chill out for a bit. Thank you very much. And it's like that reciprocal villa owner to community care. The idea that the villa owner is the paternus, the father of the estate. So he's the father of his own family, but he's also the father of the whole estate, and they have to come to him. And he mirrors like the governor, who is the paternus of the province, and then the governor mirrors the emperor. So you kind of get the levels that's going on here. Same way in a Roman fort, how the commanding officer is the paternus, the father of the fort. And so everyone else is under his authority. So that's one possibility there. And then in the 4th century, what happens is that the bathhouse is transferred into a grain dryer. So it could be that agricultural produce is more important, and maybe they built another bathhouse elsewhere that hasn't been found yet, or it could be closer to the villa, or something's going on that basically the bathhouse just, they don't need the little bathhouse anymore, so it's turned into a grain dryer instead. In the 4th century as well, you see a stone roundhouse being constructed. When you see this roundhouse, it's likely, again, it's a mill. As I've mentioned in the other villa ones, what you see is this round structure that's probably between 11 to 14 meters, so that the first floor is, the ground floor is where you have an ox who would walk around in a circle, turning a central shaft, which would then basically turn the millstone, which would then turn the grain into flour. So it's likely in the 4th century, as agricultural production's increasing, they are needing to have that so that they can then keep up with the production that they're required to produce, either for the Roman military in the north, or the villa owner is basically industrializing production, which we see across the country, so that there is more wealth. Now, an interesting thing about villas is that we always think of a single family owning a villa. What happens is maybe that there are a small number of families who own a lot of villas. And so these villa buildings, the villa owner might not even reside within the villa. They just build the villa and it exists there. And that's why the aisled hall seems to be the more important building, because the villa has to be kept clean for whenever the owner does turn up. But actually no one's really residing in it. And then the aisled hall is where all of the tenants are actually enjoying life. They are interacting there, and it's kind of like a town hall for the local community with, that's when you have your bath houses, your grain dryers, and it's your communal meeting site, which is a 2-story building, and it's your function suite, it's your local gathering space. You have feasting that's often seen in there, and it could be even like your local pub. But that's one theory, is that there's numerous very powerful villa owners who basically, small groups of very elite individuals who own lots of land but have a villa on the site. Or the other theory is that each villa owner is basically just like a subtenant to a more powerful individual. Both models are possible, but when you look at land ownership in the Roman Empire, you realize that basically everything was centralized to a very, very wealthy, very, very powerful individuals, very small number, who basically owned everything and were incredibly powerful. So it could be that this villa was kept pristine, and that actually nearby, it's the aisled hall is where everyone's interacting. But there was definitely a stone pathway leading into the actual aisled hall, which would enable for maybe carts pulled by cattle or oxen to be brought inside for the loading and unloading of goods. So it's definitely been used for agricultural purposes as well as social purposes as well. What's really interesting is that there was a lot of Anglo-Saxon pottery found on the site, about 200 sherds of 5th to 7th century pottery. Now, what's really interesting is that when they were analysing the site, there was no substantial evidence of substantial abandonment. So normally what you find is that the building collapses, all the walls are on the ground. When it's collapsed, you have a black soil level, which is kind of like where leaves or rotting has basically created a nice level of rich soil, and then you have the next layer built on top. You often find it in urban areas where maybe there's been a bit of abandonment, no one's living around there, or the streets are filling up with leaves because of the fact that there's no one really to clean it, and that the number of houses are being used in urban areas have been reduced, so you only have a couple of streets in use, and then other areas get the dark soil build up and then you build on top of it. But here, that wasn't really found at Ingleby Barwick. So it seems that the site was in use. The Aisled Hall, there was evidence at one point that the roof had been out because there was a small layer of build-up of dark soil in parts of it, but then it seems to be re-roofed. And then it continues in use, and there was sunken featured buildings, which is the Anglo-Saxon dug pit with the triangular roof, which is used as a workshop. Now, my wonder is that if they were to excavate the villa, would that be where they find the Anglo-Saxon occupation? Is someone moved in? Has the villa owner, taken off his toga? They weren't wearing togas in the late Roman period, but I'm being metaphorical here, and has now put on his wraparound Anglo-Saxon cloak and changed out his nice crossbow brooch for an Anglo-Saxon brooch? Or is he continuing to wear his crossbow brooch because of the simple fact that Romanitas continues, and you want to have the reflected glory of the empire? But I would guess that if they ever get round to excavating that site where the villa actually is, that's where they'll find the Anglo-Saxon settlement. And it's going to be very, very interesting. So I'm looking forward to that if they ever do that in the future, because it's going to be interesting to see that, to have that evidence of continuation, not just in the Roman forts and in the military sites that we often see here in northern Britain, but also in a villa as well. And that's really cool. So I really hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done already, please do subscribe because it grows the channel. It's fantastic to have you with us, and do look at the stats, and there's more of you who watch than are actually subscribed. So if you can subscribe, that helps no end. If you'd like to take that next step onwards and help me a little bit more, I do have a Ko-fi account and also a Patreon account in the description, which means that you can just support me so I can take a little bit more of time out of my calendar, produce these videos for you, which I really love doing, but it just gives me that little bit more support to do so. Finally, I really hope you join me in the next episode, and I very much enjoyed making this one. It's a topic that's close to my heart because I actually spent a lot of time in and around the area when I was growing up due to my grandparents living in and around Teesside. So I hope you've enjoyed it and that you'll join me for the next episode soon. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in another episode in the near future.